بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Inshallah, today we will complete our series that we have been continuing for the last couple of weeks, months, titled Elevating Our Sisters, a series of lessons on the greatest women in Al-Islam. And inshallah, in today's lesson, which will be the last of the series, in order to try to complete the khair and the reminders and the benefits that we have come across in order to and also continue in beneficial knowledge and different subjects that can help our brothers and sisters improve and increase in their knowledge, I decided inshallah today we'll complete this lesson in this series. I believe that this is the 13th lesson. And we will look at today a very important, often cited figure, but not often understood in terms of the details. And this lesson for today, it will be an inspiration for the sisters to look into, alongside all the other lessons that we have been sharing in this series, between the importance of having knowledge and piety and tawakkul ala Allah and righteousness and dua. I want to focus on today's lesson on sisters leaving behind a legacy. Leaving behind a legacy. And what I mean by that is having something in which they leave behind of khair in terms of good deeds, and more specifically philanthropy. And this is because we often think about, as human beings, when we pass away, everyone leaves behind a legacy, something in which they can have their name to of khair. And when we think about our times and the times before us, people would be eager in leaving behind a legacy, a sadaqatul jariyah, ongoing charity, in which they could get the rewards, but at the same time also have something which they can benefit mankind with. And so in today's lesson, we want to focus on some female role models who left behind the sadaqatul jariyah. That till today benefits people, and how sisters as well can get engaged in those kind of activities. For we know Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam from the hadith of Abi Hurairah radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he said, إذا مات الإنسان انقطع عمله إلا من ثلاثة من صدقة جارية وعلم ينتفع به وولد صالح يدعو له. That when an individual passes away, all of their good deeds come to an end except for three. And there, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he mentioned, number one, an ongoing charity, which is what I want to highlight for today. Beneficial knowledge, also connected to what we've been covering throughout this series. Many of our female role models have left behind much knowledge and students. Like the example we gave last week of Fatima, bint Abbas al-Baghdadiyah, the great knowledgeable scholar, female scholar and reformer. And the last point, he said, a righteous son who prays and supplicates for him. And so we often hear about men who left behind sadaqatul jariyah, continuous ongoing charity. But what about the sisters? What about the women? Were there women philanthropists in Islam who left behind endowments, or we call awqaf, who left behind madaris, schools, who left behind properties for the poor? And the answer is yes. And I'm going to cover two of them today, inshallah. And this will be, again, our last series session on this series. And these two individuals are very special. One in the earlier part of the ummah, and one in the latter. And it's none other than the story and the legacy left behind by a famous woman, very famous in today's time too, who is credited for establishing the first formal university or institution of knowledge in the world. And this is something which many of the non-Muslims, they credit as well. many the non-Muslims, they mention this and they credit this as well to this woman, and this is none other than Fatima bint Muhammad al-Fihriyyah. Fatima bint Muhammad al-Fihriyyah, also nicknamed Banain. I believe that's her kunya. And so we'll repeat that again. This is an important character, important figure in Islamic heritage. Fatima bint Muhammad al-Fihriyyah. And she was from the time of the Salaf. And they mention, the biographers, when they talk about her, that she was nicknamed Banain, or it could be Banin, but I believe it's with the Fatha Banain from what I've read. And so this great woman is credited in today's time as being the first, as the one who opened the first university or first knowledge institution in the world. And what they intend by this is that a formal university or educational institute. As for informal educational institutes, then there have been many means across the world in time. And for the Ummah, we know Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he was the first in our Ummah to be teaching the companions and having knowledge circles and establishing and then later Sahaba with the Madaris. But what they intend by this is like a formal institution. For the school that she established, later then became an institution, a university. And so this woman, Fatima bint Muhammad al-Fihriyyah, she's also al-Qurashiyya, for she's from the Quraysh tribe. Banu Fihr is a tribe from the Quraysh. And before I begin talking about her, al-Banain, it's important first to know where she came from, i.e., what's her background. So even though she was from the Quraysh tribe, her legacy was in what we call today Maghrib. Al-Maghrib. And Maghrib refers to the west. In Islamic geography, and Maghrib is the west. Because Mashriq, the east, was Baghdad, and the whole of the what we refer to as the Central Asia region, and of course the Middle East before that. And then the west was considered Andalus, Spain, and then North Africa, and etc. And so her legacy was in this region. And this is important because many Muslims are not too familiar with those regions. Those were well-known places for Muslims at that time of Salaf. And today, obviously, when we think about the Maghrib, we know Morocco. And so her legacy specifically was to do with the city as known as Fas or Fez or Maghrib, right? Morocco, right? Fez in Morocco, currently in Morocco. Even though, if you look carefully, the legacy of this school that she built was actually connected to the name and the place known as Al-Qayrawan. And so when it's important to understand that there's two things going on, that she established this place, this institute in Fez, Morocco, Fez, but the name of the institute became known later as Jami'atul Qayrawan, right? The Institute of Qayrawan. So this is important. Nicknamed or taken from the name of the city established, the first city established in North Africa by Uqba bin Nafi' rahimahullah, who was the army general dispatched by Muawiyah radiyallahu ta'ala anhu to this region. And so a lot of this is important because this part of the history for many Muslims is not very familiar with this North African region of da'wah and ulama and people who came out of there. Many mashayikh, they came out of this region. But we want to focus first on the city of Qayrawan, what's the city? And then we'll go to her legacy. So it's important to know that, because Qayrawan later became a hub of knowledge. A hub of knowledge. So even though her institute, Jami'at Qayrawan, as it was called later, was actually located in Fez, Morocco, but nonetheless, the city of Qayrawan was what it was. The university was nicknamed after it, because that city was the first of the cities, and to be opened and to be established in North Africa. So what is Qayrawan, right? So many of us might have heard the name Qayrawan from the great scholar Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani, al-Malik al-Saghir, as his nickname was. Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani is well known Maliki scholar who, upon the Aqidah Salaf al-Salih, who came from Qayrawan, and he had the nickname Malik, the little Malik, for he was like Malik rahimahullah, in knowledge and benefit, and of course not in status and full knowledge, but in terms of his adherence to the madhab and protection of it, and his great knowledge. So this city of Qayrawan, and sometimes it's spelled in English as Karawan, right, with a K, but it's Qayrawan. Its origin, the epistemology or the etymology, of the term Qayrawan, it's mentioned, Wallahu A'lam, that it is a mixture of a Persian name. The name Qayrawan is a mixture of a Persian name, a word referring to a campsite or a resting place. So it's an Arabic version of the word Karawan, which is military camp. Because when Uqba bin Nafi rahimahullah came and he made Fath, he opened up Qayrawan, he settled in the city and he made his soldiers and his people in this rest and to live in this military camp. And later on it became in the city. And Qayrawan is in Tunis. Qayrawan is in Tunisia, not Tunis. And so it's important to understand the two differences. There's also a masjid that was named after him. But before we continue further, I want to mention the story. An interesting karama, miracle that happened in the Fath of Qayrawan. And again, like I said, for many Muslims, this region, the Maghrib, is not so familiar with us. When we hear Maghrib, we know it's referring to Morocco, but we also think Andalus, Spanish, Muslim Spain, and Portugal. But there's a great history of da'wah and scholarship and establishments and khair that happened in North Africa, which is very important for the Muslim when they have time to go over and to be reminded of. But getting to this point, Qayrawan, the city that was established by Uqba bin Nafi', rahimahullah, in the city of Qayrawan in Tunisia, there's a story about how he established this city. And it's a narration I'm going to read now, inshallah. And I read it some time ago, and it's fascinating. So, Uqba bin Nafi' rahimahullah, he established the city in the year 50 Hijri, or 670 CE. Year 50 Hijri, or 670 CE. Hafid ibn Hajar rahimahullah, in his kitab Al-Isaba fi Tamyiz al-Sahaba, Al-Isaba, he mentions the following story or narration. He says, and he's discussing the issue of Fath al-Qayrawan, how Qayrawan was open. And I want to just connect this to her story, even though her institute was built in Morocco, but it took the name later of Qayrawan. So I felt that, inshallah, it's a good connection. He says, Hafid ibn Hajar rahimahullah, it was reported by Khalifa min Khayyat. So this is a book in history written by early scholar, right, of history and hadith. He reports in his tarikh, so here Khalifa, he reports in his tarikh, bi-isnadin Hassan, Hafid ibn Hajar says, bi-isnadin Hassan. Then Uqba rahimahullah, when he opened Ifriqiyyah, and now here's the benefit, Africa, the name for Africa, the Arabs used to call it Ifriqiyyah, and therefore many people had that name, Ifriqi. For example, even at our time, some of our mashayikh, they had that name, like Sheikh and Muhaddith Abdul Rahman al-Ifriqi, Right? And so what intended by Africa at that time, in the earlier stages of Ummah and Islamic conquests, Africa, Al-Fihriyyah referred to North Africa. And it's important because later on then Africa was conquered more. And so they called the Al-Fihriyyah, that region, because it was in the African continent. And later on when Islam spread all across Africa then obviously takes a bigger terminology. So he says when Uqba opened Al-Fihriyyah, وقف على قيروان. He stood at the front or in front of or facing Qayrawan. Right, this campsite he's going to establish as a city. فقال, and he said, يا أهل هذا الوادي, O people of this land, verily we, means me and my army, are going to settle here inshallah. So disperse, whatever it means. Who is he talking to? He's talking to the inhabitants of this valley, Aid Hayawanat, and the dangerous animals and the snakes. So he said, O people or inhabitants of this valley, me and my army are going to settle here, so disperse. ثلاث مرات. He said it 3 times. Or في الرواية, he said it for 3 days. He kept repeating this. It's very important. This is a karama. It's a miracle that happened. فقال, the narrator said, فما نرى حجرا ولا شجرا إلا يخرج من تحته دابة. We didn't see after that except that underneath every tree and beneath every rock came an animal, and في الرواية السباع, wild animals and snakes, and they ran away, means they fled in correspondence, responding to the speech of Uqba. And then when they all fled, they left the wadi clear for them. And then he told his army, Inzilu Bismillah. Now everybody descend with Allah's name. Subhanallah. Qissatu Hassan Hafid Hajar, this narration. So it's a beautiful narration to show you, subhanAllah, that this is the miracles that came to those who are of our Salaf when they went to conquer the lands that bring truth and Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala aided them with these kind of great miracles. Allahu Akbar. So then when he landed in Qayrawan, he established the masjid, first the city, then later on there's a masjid he established called Masjid Uqb Nafi', etc. Alright, back to inshallah, our story, our benefit for today. Fatima bint Muhammad Fihriyyah. She's the one who, she built what we said today is often cited as the first university or educational institute, formal educational institute in the city of Fez, Morocco. And she built this in the year 245 Hijri. So what is that? 245 Hijri. That means she's in Waqt Salaf, time of the Salaf. And the background story of how she built it is mentioned by one of the Moroccan biographers named Abu Hassan Ali ibn Abi Zara al-Fasi. Ibn Abi Zara al-Fasi, who died between the years 1310 to 1320. He has a book called Anisul Mutarrab Birawdatul Qirtas, which is a book he gathers about the discussion about Morocco and the Maghreb area, Maghreb in general, what happened. There he has a chapter, Khabar an Jami' Qayrawan wa Sifatuhu. The description and the reports about the Jami' al-Qayrawan, the Institute of Qayrawan or the Masjid of Qayrawan, and its description. Now, before we continue, we should know something. The ulama, historians in the West, they tend to say that Fatima al-Fihriyyah established the first educational institute. But what seems to be reported by many of the Islamic historians is that she established a masjid, to which then later became an institute, to which later then became the University of Qayrawan today. So I repeat, many historians, they mention that she established a madrasa. This is Western historians and writers, but when we look at the Islamic sources, what it seems to be apparent is that she established a jami', a masjid, and from that jami' came durus, knowledge-based lessons, and khutbahs, and then later a madrasa was established, and then later the university was named for that school, that place that was her original masjid. He says, the mu'allif, Ibn Abi Zara', he says that, it goes to backstory, and so we'll just mention that very quickly, that he says that during the time, or early time in the Maghrib, there was the Imam, of course, a ruler. His name is Al-Idris, and he is the one who settled in what was referred to as, at that time, the Jami', the congregational masjid in Qayrawan. And what happened was that he had left behind many children and much wealth. And so what happened was, when he passed away, from those children, that he had, was a imra'ah, a woman, Mubarakah, who was blessed, Salihah, righteous, Ismuha Fatima, her name was Fatima, and she was given the kunya al-Banayn, bint Muhammad al-Fihriyyah al-Qayrawani. And so here we see that that it was in Qayrawan that she established this masjid. And again, we said that there is some discussion about that, because some mentioned that she established it in Fas, and this is what seems to be correct, that she was from Qayrawan, then she moved to Fas, which is Faz, with her father, Muhammad bin Abdullah al-Fihri, and then later on, when she inherited wealth, what she did. So we repeat that she originally lived in Qayrawan, and we said Qayrawan was established by Uqba bin Nafi' al-Fihri. And her father, Muhammad bin Abdullah al-Fihri, he had much wealth, and again he also inherited from his forefathers until from an imam named Al-Idris, who was a ruler, or who was one who had authority. So when her father passed away, he left behind much wealth. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ مِنْ أَوْلَادٍ. He had no other children except for 2 daughters. One was Fatima, one was Maryam. The one we're talking about is Fatima, not Maryam. But both of them left behind. So what happened is that they took the money that they were inherited from their father. And Fatima, thought what to do with this money that she received from her father. A lot of money. Malin jasiman, he says, a lot of money. Halalun tayyiban, was a pure wealth. Laysa fihi shubha, it has no shubha. وَلَمْ يَتَغَيَّرُوا بِبَيْعِ وَشَرَاءٍ. She didn't use any of it, or the money was not tampered with, or used for any buying and selling. And so what happened was that when she was living in Faz, Morocco, with her husband, she decided to use this inheritance left behind for her father. فأرادت أن تصرفه. She wanted to use this money في وجوه البر والأعمال الخير. This is the shahid I want to take for the sisters. She used this wealth her father left behind for her, not to build for herself a castle or a palace, or to even spend it, even though all of this is halal. But she wanted to use it in what? في وجوه البر والأعمال الخير. In the good and in piety. And this is what Ibn Abi Zara' is mentioning. Going back to the hadith we mentioned in the beginning, إذا مات الإنسان انقطع عمله إلا من ثلاثة من صدقة جارية. SubhanAllah. So what she did was, she took this wealth her father left behind, obviously for her and her sister. So she had some and her sister had some. And she bought فاشترت موضوع قيروان. She bought some land in Qayrawan, which was close, right, very close to where she was, and she spent the money that she had in it to have it dug and to be excavated, and the pillars of the masjid be built, and that occurred in the year 245 Hijri, corresponding to the year 859 CE. 245 Hijri, 859 CE. And so she had this masjid built, and of course when it was built, it was then obviously built with fences, and it was fortified with the pillars. It was excavated first with taking out the sand and the rocks. So everything was prepared until she built this Jami' Madhkur, this well-known or notified Jami', which is a congregational and a masjid. And then later, when this masjid being built, it's also mentioned, Ibn Abi Zara' says, that her sister Maryam, she used the wealth that she had to build a Jami' al-Andalus, Allahu Akbar. Look, these two, she built one in Fez, and her sister Maryam built a Jami', a masjid in Andalus. This is important, right? To benefit, to show that like brothers, sisters can get involved fil khair. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses them to build the masajid, the madaris, and to leave behind something. And using this halal money, both sisters did this. And these two institutes continue to benefit في أيام أدراسة. Adrasa is like the rulers who came after from different dynasties. Once the masjids were established, will continue to be benefited from, and lessons will be taken there, and the masajid, the people were praying in, and much khair happened. And it continues, Ibn Zara' says, وَكَانَ أول خطيب خطب به الشيخ الفقيه الصالح Abdullah bin Ali al-Farisi. He said the first khatib to do khutbah there was the Shaykh al-Faqih, the righteous person, Abdullah bin Ali al-Farisi. And he was the first to give the khutbah in the Jami' al-Qayrawan, as it was called. And it continued, obviously, of the masjid having the khair that it had. So when it was built in the year 245 Hijri, and he even talks about the masjid being a certain diameters and spacious place built for the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the land he describes ardan bayda biqurb. It was a nice white type of land which was bought and it was built for this purpose. It's built for this purpose, to be a masjid. And of course, until later, it says that when this masjid was built later on, historians mentioned that the masjid then was included alongside the masjid. There was a courtyard, and alongside the masjid, which is courtyard, which people benefited from and made wudu and used it for the ibadat. It said that when the masjid was finally completed in the year Ramadan in 245 Hijri, she prayed 2 rak'ahs salatul shukr to her Lord for allowing her to complete this great deed. And then, inshallah, the masjid continued then until it was later on. We said it was connected to, then the dynasties connected that. They connected that masjid to a school, and then from the school it became then called the University of Qayrawan. So this is important. It became the University of Qayrawan. And the University of Qayrawan, it exists till today. And it was nicknamed, it was founded as a mosque by Fatima al-Fihriyyah, then turned into the Institute University of Qayrawan in 1963. In our time, the formal term University of Qayrawan was used, and till today exists. Now, the benefit we take from this story already, is the eagerness of Fatima bint Muhammad al-Fihriyyah to use the wealth Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inherited her with for khair, and to leave behind a legacy. And she thanked her Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless it. And the Shaykh then continues, Ibn Zara' mentioning that from then on, much khair happened there, and people continue to benefit from it. And to get you to understand the status of this madrasa, because later it became madrasa, notable scholars benefited from. Notable scholars benefited from. It wasn't just at her time, it continued. Even afterwards, there was people who benefited from this jami', and notable alumni who attended or visited or taught in that jami'. And this is something interesting, because when we hear about these schools, we may think to ourselves that these schools were a long time ago, or that they were built, but they had great people who came out of them. And amongst those that they mentioned who visited, taught, or was connected to the Jami' al-Qayrawan was Ibn Khaldun, the famous Tunisian sociologist and historian who was connected to this Jami'. And again, he's one of the many who graduated or connected or studied or taught or was near that Jami'. And so that's one. Another, obviously, benefit is the fact that her sister then, competing in the same khair, she also built she also built Jami' to which she benefited the people from. And likewise later, we see others doing the same. So before we continue, we said Ibn Khaldun, he himself, he was connected to this Jami'. And they mentioned that the original copies of the Kitab al-Muqaddimah or Kitab al-Ibar, which he wrote, was present in that Jami'. And some they mention him as alumni of the school. Seems to be that he was an alumni, or later one who visited that school. Although some they say that it was others, other than that. But if you go back to his kitab, Ibn Khaldun rahimahullah, he actually discusses the school. And if we go back to his kitab, Tarikh Ibn Khaldun, on volume 4, page 20, he discusses the story of Fatima Fihriyyah, taken from Ibn Zara', and he discusses her building this masjid and benefiting the people. And so what seems to be is that he too was connected somehow, because he also mentions her and her contribution to others. I also want to mention another example. So it's not just her. There's another one. And that is a sister who came, a great wealthy woman who came after. And her name was Sit Ash-Sham. Sit Ash-Sham. And her full name was a nickname, Sit Ash-Sham Fatima Khatun. Fatima. So her nickname was Sit Ash-Sham Sayyida Khawateen, or some they say she was the daughter of Amir Najmuddin Ayyub. And so they call her Sit Ash-Sham Fatima Khatun bint Najmuddin Abu Bakr. Najmuddin Ayyub. And she lived in Sham, right? Greater Syria area. And she obviously grew up in the household of the ruler. And she was the second sister, according to historians, the second sister of Salahuddin Ayyubi. Salahuddin Ayyubi, and all of us know Salahuddin Ayyubi, right? The great conqueror and liberator of Sham, of Quds, Jerusalem. Sit Ash-Sham, even though she is not as popular as her brother, it's mentioned in her biography. As Ibn Kathir, he mentions Khatun, that's her full name, Fatima. So I'll repeat her name again, Sit Ash-Sham Fatima Khatun. It's mentioned, Ibn Kathir says Khatun al-Jalila. She was a noble woman, Khatun, Sit Ash-Sham, the daughter of Najmuddin Ayyub, rahimahullah, the sister of the Muluk. And she was also the aunt of the children of the king. And he says about her, واقفة مدرستين الشامية. She left behind 2 institutes, 2 schools in Sham, Shamiyya, one in the northern region, another one in another part of the region. And of course, these schools that these women are leaving behind are schools in which people graduated from, scholars they attended, people they learned. And he says that she passed away in the year 616 Hijri in Damascus. And he mentions that a lot of people came to pray for her and to bury her. So these 2 now stories, or 3 now, Fatima Fihriyyah, Sit Ash-Sham, Maryam Fihriyyah, all these are examples of sisters who, with their righteousness and the wealth Allah blessed them with, left behind a legacy for the ummah. Sadaqatun jariyah. And this is an encouragement to the sisters to think along these lines. What can they give back to the ummah? What can they do for those around them? What can we give back to those who are poor and needy, or those who are the servants of Allah, in terms of education, charity, it could be a well, it could be leaving behind a house for the wayfarers and travelers. So many things. And we want to benefit this point because in today's time we hear a lot about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He blesses people with wealth. But one thing that we need to think about is long term, not just the wealth, but the legacies that this wealth Allah has given us, leaves us behind. What can we do with the money Allah has blessed us to build the masajid, the madaris, which people can benefit and study, and later on reap those rewards. Hadith ibn Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma قال قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم خير إن أحب الله, the most beloved people to Allah, إن أحب الله, those who Allah is most pleased with, or another way, خير الناس, the best of people, أنفعهم للناس, are those who are most beneficial to other people. And if you think about this, you think that people today, they are not always thinking forward. They may think in the intermediate or the immediate. How can I spend this money in blessed benefits and luxury today? And how can I use this money in something to allow myself to enjoy my life now, which is not haram. For when Allah blesses someone with wealth, it's permissible to use the wealth for the khair. Like when we look at these women, we see they were trendsetters. They were people who were righteous but forward thinking. What they can do to protect themselves and to build their akhirah. To what they can do with their wealth and money to help the ummah. And I believe these are great examples amongst the many examples we gave in this series of not only of women who had money, or women who had piety, or women who had knowledge, but also women who were philanthropists. Sisters who helped the ummah, and it's not limited to the men only. So sometimes we think that only men can, or often men are the only ones who, typically speaking, are the ones people hear about giving the wealth and building the masajid, or the ones who are doing these type of things. But we see that even we have great sisters and women, our ummah, who are contributors to these things, and these institutions still last today. So for example, we see today her institute, her masjid later on became then a school, and then it became the University of Qayrawan that we hear about today. Also, if we think about our society, we may think about how many of times women are encouraged certain things, but this chapter, philanthropy and sadaqatul jari and khair, we don't hear about it so much. Even though many of our sahabiyat, there were those who used to give. We gave examples of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. We gave the example of Asma radiallahu ta'ala anha. And there was others, women who used their wealth in giving to the poor and the needy, or just donating it. And this became part of their legacy. And if you think about this, for example, Zainab radiallahu ta'ala anha, the wife of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, she would earn money by selling goods that she would make with her hand. For example, artisan type of products, and she would sell them and then use the money for sadaqah. Subhanallah. We also have the example of Zainab, Zawjatu Ibn Mas'ud. Zainab radiallahu ta'ala anha, the wife of Ibn Mas'ud, who also used to make money. She also used to make money by selling and making things with her hand. So she used to produce some goods, and then she would sell it, and she would make money until even the qissa comes that she gave sadaqah, and the ulama also explain it to be even zakat, to her own husband, Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And what we're taking from this is that these women use their wealth in that which is bigger and greater, and it's an encouragement for the sisters, along with enjoying the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to think and how they could contribute to the betterment of the ummah. And with this, inshallah, we end our series on the great women of this ummah. And in reality, there are so many more that we could mention, but due to the time and due to the limitations of our series, we cannot cover everybody, and we cannot cover everyone, and we cannot talk about everyone. But with Allah's permission, we've covered many and highlighted many of their contributions and the khair that they did. And by that we hope Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will allow the sisters to be empowered with the role models from our ummah, and not need to look outside to those who are not like our women. For in Islam we have women who are not like any other women. Those who are believers in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who Allah blessed them with taqwa, with ilm, knowledge and righteousness, and who surpassed the women of their time, even the women of our own time, in the good, and will forever be role models for our ummah. But sadly, as we said before in the beginning of the series, these stories and these great figures are not highlighted enough, and often are not even mentioned amongst the populace. And so people then are under the impression that there aren't such people in our ummah. And so with all of this, inshallah, at the very least, we hope Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us some role models to look up to and to be reminded of and to aspire to be like, not just only for the sisters but even for the brothers, to see that we need to elevate all of ourselves in coming closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and working diligently in improving ourselves and leaving behind a legacy like our Salaf al-Salih and our great Imams and our great role models. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us by that which we heard. If any questions or anything, inshallah, we will take them, inshallah. If there are any questions or anything that, inshallah, to be repeated. Any questions or anything? Inshallah, if there are not any questions or anything, next week, inshallah, we'll continue in khair and to begin a new series, a new topic on a different subject, inshallah ta'ala. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to benefit from that which we have heard and benefited from. And if it's possible, inshallah, we will try to compile a lot of the benefits that we have said. Alhamdulillah, some of them have already been compiled but to gather them in one place and to share them with everyone, so that they can have these role models written and to refer to and to be shared with others by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's permission. And inshallah, if there is no other questions, we will inshallah end with this much. Inshallah ta'ala. Wa iyyakum, inshallah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from us what we have done here and to benefit us by this. And inshallah, it's something to share with the brothers and the sisters, these type of topics, to share with them that which we have learned and to inshallah inspire them as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed us to benefit. طيب إن شاء الله جزاكم الله خير وبارك الله فيكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.